It was a quiet morning in Nazareth Heights, a small hillside neighborhood outside Jerusalem, where olive trees still grew between the gray buildings and stray cats watched from the rooftops. The hum of the city was faint, distant, like a song half remembered. Inside a modest apartment on the third floor, a 5-year-old boy sat at the kitchen table, tracing circles in a puddle of milk. His mother, Miriam, moved softly between stove and sink. The air smelled of bread and soap, a normal morning. Yet the boy's silence carried something heavier, like the air before a storm. His eyes, bright but strangely deep, seemed fixed on something invisible, as if he were watching light move through time. Then, without turning his head, he said, "Joseph wasn't alone in the well." The spoon slipped from her hand. "What, Eli? Who told you that?" He blinked slowly. "There was light," he whispered. "The well wasn't dark. It spoke to him. It said, 'You will feed those who hurt you.'" Her breath caught in her throat. She had read the story of Joseph many times, but no verse spoke of light. No word described comfort in that pit. Yet her son's tone was steady, not like someone imagining, but remembering. Eli looked toward the window. "I can still smell the sand," he murmured. "Warm, like bread from the oven." The city's noise faded. For a moment, the ticking of the clock sounded older than the house itself. The sunlight turned golden, trembling, as though it, too, were listening. When the father entered, setting down his keys, the boy turned to him and asked softly, "Do you remember when the stars sang over Egypt?" No one spoke. The air seemed alive, wholly fragile, unbearably close. "And you? If you had been there, in that ordinary kitchen on an ordinary morning, would you have felt it? Would you have known that some memories are not born in this lifetime, but sent from a place where time cannot reach? Stay." Sometimes the mystery speaks louder than reason. Nazareth Heights wakes early, long before the buses warm their engines. Laundry lines sway like quiet banners between concrete balconies, and olive branches scratch the pale sky. In a third-floor apartment with thin walls and faithful routines, a small family moves softly through morning light. The boy is 5. His name is Eli. He sits with his legs tucked under the chair, back straight, watching steam rise from his cup as if the vapor were a staircase only he can see. He does not fidget. He listens to the apartment, to the city, to something else. His silence is gentle, not heavy, the kind that cleans the room. His mother, Miriam, keeps the kitchen like a chapel. Breadcloth folded neatly, spice jars aligned like small pilgrims, oil lamp near the window, though the apartment has electricity. She prays and whispers as she measures flour, as if each grain could hear her. Their faith is quiet and old, not the kind that argues, but the kind that remembers. A cross stitched by her grandmother hangs above the doorway, and beside it, a tiny card with a psalm about trust written in her careful hand. The father, David, leaves early for construction sites beyond the ridge. He carries dust home in the cuffs of his pants, stories in the creases near his eyes. He is practical, budget notebooks, lists, sensible shoes, but he has learned to respect the spaces where words do not work. He kisses Eli's head the same way each morning, as if touching the hinge of something holy. Before the strangeness began, their days were simple. School forms pinned with magnets, late rent folded in an envelope, neighbors arguing about parking under the open stairwell. On Fridays, Miriam lit a small candle and let the apartment breathe. On Sundays, they walked up the hill to a stone church that remembered more winters than any of them. The priest's voice was low and warm. His sermons smelled of old books and rain. And yet, even then, before anybody named it, there were small departures from the ordinary. Eli would pause on the way to the elevator and tilt his head toward the courtyard, as if hearing a conversation behind a wall. He would ask to sit by the window at night and count lights on the hill, not like a child counts, but like a watchman. He remembered people he had not met and places they had not visited. He spoke little, but when he did, the apartment listened. The first decidedly sacred strangeness arrived, like a soft knock. The electricity flickered at dawn. Miriam set a kettle on the gas flame and hummed a hymn her mother used to hum. Eli climbed onto the chair without a word. The city below began its daily shapes. Vendors, horns, children with backpacks, and the apartment filled with the usual sounds. Water in the pipes, a neighbor dragging a chair, the old clock ticking in lament. Miriam reached for the honey and stopped. Eli was looking at his empty plate like a person looks at a horizon. It wasn't worry. It wasn't sleepiness. It was a recognizing. "Habibi," she said, just the one word. The question folded inside the tenderness. Eli blinked and turned to the window, where morning had laid a thin river of light across the sill. The air shifted, barely, the way a lung shifts before a sigh. He placed his palm on the table as though greeting something. A small smile arrived and then left, like the shore meeting a wave. Nothing dramatic happened. No wind, no trumpet, no quake. Only the sense that another room had quietly opened inside the room they already knew. Miriam felt it in her chest, an unnameable quiet, the kind that makes a person stand still in the middle of an ordinary task. She has always been careful not to exaggerate. She has seen enough of the world to know that not every feeling deserves a name. But this one did not pass. It stayed like a fragrance that refuses to leave, even after the window is opened. Later that morning, when David returned for the lunch he had forgotten, he noticed the same difference. "What's this?" he asked, half laughing, pretending not to be moved by what he could not understand. The sun seemed warmer inside than outside. The clock ticked slower. Eli's eyes, those steady, listening eyes, made the room look taller. They did not speak of it to neighbors. Sacred things wither under certain kinds of light. Instead, Miriam watched. She watched how Eli's fingers paused over pages as if greeting old words. She watched how he would touch the cool water of the faucet and then close his eyes, as though remembering another well. She watched him offer the last piece of bread without being asked, and how grateful he looked when nobody took it, as if saving something for someone unseen. That evening on the church steps, the priest greeted them and touched Eli's shoulder. "Quiet is strong," he said. He didn't ask for stories. He didn't diagnose the boy. He simply smiled, like a man who has learned to pray with his ears. In the days that followed, the apartment began to feel, how to say it, porous. The edges softened. The ordinary did not disappear. It deepened. The timetable on the fridge was still there, but it carried a new weight, as if time itself had turned to look at them. You could still hear the mop on the neighbor's floor, but beneath it there was a second sound, like wind moving through a field you cannot see. You have passed a child like this, haven't you? One who rearranges a room without touching anything? One who speaks little, and yet, when he looks your way, a door inside you swings open? What would you call such a presence if it visited your kitchen? Coincidence? Imagination? Or would you dare to name it the first footstep of something holy? You have met children who demand attention, but have you met one whose silence demands reverence? There, in Nazareth Heights, before any confession, before any revelation, the world had already begun to tilt. The family's life was still the same. Bills, errands, aching feet, but the floor felt different underfoot, as if some ancient river ran just beneath the tile and the house had learned to float. It began like the echo of a dream that refused to leave. Days passed quietly in Nazareth Heights, but something unseen lingered around Eli. An air that bent the light, a silence that seemed to listen back. The city went on with its noise and horns, the markets shouting, buses sighing, yet inside that small apartment, time behaved differently. Miriam noticed first. When she prayed before dawn, Eli would already be awake, sitting cross-legged by the window, eyes half closed, whispering to the morning, as if greeting an old friend. Sometimes she would hear fragments of words, phrases too solemn for a 5-year-old. "He didn't sleep that night," Eli murmured once. "The desert was cold. Joseph looked at the stars and told them, 'Do not forget my brothers.'" The mother's hands trembled. She wanted to interrupt, to remind him that such words weren't in any verse, but something in his voice forbade interruption. It was calm, ancient, almost prayerful. One evening, as the call to prayer drifted faintly through the open window, Eli drew a picture in silence, a deep well, a boy smiling beneath a ring of stars. Around it, he painted gold lines that looked like rays. "What is that light?" his father asked, kneeling beside him. "The voice," Eli answered simply. "The one that stayed with him when he was sold." David tried to smile, but the words landed heavily. "And how do you know that?" Eli looked up, expressionless, yet full of something vast. "Because I was there." The father's breath caught. There was no mischief in those eyes, no confusion, just a certainty older than his age. David left the room in silence, his footsteps careful, as if afraid to wake whatever presence had begun to dwell among them. From that day, the boy's words came like rainfall, quiet, spontaneous, unpredictable. Sometimes he would speak in riddles. The well wasn't a prison, it was a door. The sand listened when Joseph prayed. He forgave them before they walked away. Each sentence struck differently, soft but heavy. Miriam began writing them down in a small notebook, though she did not know why. The handwriting shook as she wrote, afraid the ink itself might carry power. At night, Eli's sleep grew restless. He would turn and whisper in languages they didn't know. Sounds like Hebrew, but older, gentler. Once, when Miriam touched his forehead, she felt it burning with cold, as though frost and fire shared the same breath. One afternoon, as rain softened the city's roofs, she asked him, "Eli, why do you say you were there?" He looked at her for a long moment before answering, "Because when I close my eyes, the wind tastes like Egypt." And then, quietly, "Because I remember the smell of his tears." Miriam sat beside him, unable to speak. The sound of rain filled the silence. In that moment, something deep shifted. Not in the boy, but in her. The boundary between memory and revelation thinned until it was almost transparent. When David came home that night, he found his wife sitting on the floor beside Eli's bed, her face wet, not with fear, but awe. She whispered, "He speaks of things no one could teach him." David sat down slowly, hands trembling. "And if it's true?" he asked. Miriam looked at the boy's sleeping face. "Then the heavens remember through him." "Oh." Outside, the rain stopped. The streets shimmered beneath the lamplight, reflecting the clouds like broken glass. Inside, the lamp flickered once and steadied, a small, steadfast flame standing against the impossible. "And you, if you heard your child speak of things no scripture has written, would your heart believe? Would you protect the mystery or flee from it? What if the divine chose the smallest voice to remember what the world forgot?" The days did not break. They unfolded like linen shaken gently over a bed. Nothing in the city changed. Buses sighed, vendors argued, scooters threaded the alleys. But the apartment on the third floor carried a different weather. It was as if the walls had learned to breathe. Lamps seemed warmer, shadows arrived more slowly. The air itself felt attentive, like a choir waiting for a note. Eli spoke less and meant more. He would place his palm on the refrigerator door before opening it, like a priest touching a sanctuary curtain. He would pause on the threshold between rooms as though thresholds deserved reverence. Sometimes he'd stand at the sink and let water run over his fingers, eyes distant, whispering, "Not every descent is burial, some are planting." Miriam would hear and go still, dish in hand, heart tightening and opening at once. At night the house deepened. The usual creaks, the hissing pipes, the clock's soft complaint, all of it settled under a new undertone that the parents could not name. The silence grew textured, filled with a presence that did not demand attention, but drew it. When Eli slept, his breathing matched the rhythm of something older, as though he were listening to a memory pulsing beneath the floor. They agreed not to tell neighbors. Sacred things can die of small talk, yet secrecy brought its own weight. Miriam's prayers stretched longer, quieter. She knelt on the kitchen tiles after everyone had gone to bed, palms up, not asking, not bargaining, just consenting, trembling. David, who had always met the world in straight lines and sturdy beams, began to lean into quiet corners and ask the empty room, "What do you want with us?" He did not expect answers. The question itself felt like obedience. The conflict grew where love does, in the ordinary. Miriam wanted to shelter the mystery. David wanted to measure it. She wrote Eli's sayings into a notebook and tucked it into the bread drawer as if bread and word were cousins. He searched scripture and commentaries late into the night, hoping to find a footnote that would anchor their astonishment. When he found nothing, he paced the balcony, counting the hill lights with his jaw set. "I won't call this a lie," he muttered to the dark, "but I must call it something." Eli did not perform. He did not seek attention or refuse it. He lived like the eye of a storm, still aware. He started waking just before dawn to sit by the window with his blanket around his shoulders. One morning, Miriam heard him hum a tune she did not know, slow and spare. She brought him warm milk. "What are you hearing, Habibi?" she asked softly. He kept his eyes on the paling sky. "Footsteps," he said. "Grain being measured. A man learning how to be gentle with hunger." He sipped. He forgave them before they arrived. "Who?" Miriam whispered, though she already knew. "The brothers," Eli said, and his face, oh, his small face, held a sorrow too kind to be bitter. The house began to answer him. A small framed print of a psalm, long crooked on the hallway nail, righted itself without help. The oil lamp, a wick, trimmed to a tired glow, brightened when Eli came near and dimmed when he left, like a plant turning toward the sun. Once, during a power outage that silenced even the refrigerator's hum, a column of cool air drifted from the bedroom to the kitchen, as if someone invisible had crossed the apartment carrying a bowl. Miriam felt it pass through her arms and almost dropped the dish she was drying. She caught her breath and whispered, "Welcome," before she understood why. David noticed other things. At the worksite, he lifted a beam he would not normally lift alone. It rose like the muscle had borrowed gentleness from elsewhere. A foreman cursed at a worker, then stopped mid-word and apologized, rubbing his eyes like a man waking. Coming home, David found the building's stairwell quieter than usual, as if arguments had forgotten their lines. Each time he told himself, coincidence is a faithful friend. Each time, something in him did not consent. One evening, as rain bruised the western sky, Eli asked to light the lamp early. "Why?" David asked. "Because light listens," the boy said. They gathered at the table. The first match failed. The second flared but died, smoke like a ribbon. Before David struck a third, the wick woke itself and lifted into a flame slim and steady. None of them moved. The rain began, soft and decisive. Eli smiled without triumph, as if greeting a neighbor. After they ate, the father cleared his throat. "Eli," he said, the name a bridge he was building while he walked across it, "when you speak about Joseph, are you pretending?" Eli looked at him with patience. Not indulgence, not condescension, only a patience as old as desert wind. "Pretending is when you choose," he said. "This chooses me." David nodded slowly, the way a man nods in a courtroom when he's heard a true thing that will cost him. And if I ask it to stop? Eli folded his small hands. Then it will wait, he whispered. Love can wait longer than fear. That night, David did not sleep. He sat on the balcony in the hush after rain, watching the droplets hang and fall from the iron rail like beads sliding off a string. He remembered the day Eli was born, the first cry like a lantern in his chest. He remembered promises he'd made silently to provide, to protect, to explain. Now something had arrived that asked him to protect what he could not explain. He pressed his palms together and said the first honest prayer he'd said in years. Teach me not to be large. Teach me to be true. In the morning, Miriam found him at the table with a Bible open, coffee gone cold. What are you looking for? She asked, and the question meant proof, permission, peace. He traced a finger over the story of Joseph. A sentence I must have missed, he said, one that mentions light in a well. Miriam sat beside him, laid her hand over his. Or a sentence that belongs to heaven and is visiting us now, she said, and it wasn't certainty, it was surrender. Eli patted in hair a halo of sleep. He leaned against his mother and looked at the open page. It's not missing, he said gently. It's remembered. The mystery grew outward. On the bus to school, a girl crying quietly stopped when Eli looked her way. She pressed her palm to her chest and mouthed, "Thank you," though he had said nothing. At the market, a vendor long known for dishonest scales paused, reset the weight, and added fruit to Miriam's bag with an embarrassed smile. The city did not transform. It softened at the edges, as though the stones themselves were practicing listening. Yet the cost grew too. David's foreman asked why he had taken a day off midweek. A neighbor in the stairwell mentioned shadows passing beneath Eli's door at night, the sort of remark that can turn into rumor. Miriam feared the world's hands clutching at what she could not hold. She taught herself a new kind of courage, to guard without hiding, to confess without explaining. Each evening she tidied the apartment like a sanctuary after Vespers, put the notebook back in the bread drawer, and whispered, "We belong to the one who is not surprised." Eli began to dream with his eyes open. He would stare at the wall and speak quietly, not to the wall, but through it. "Forgiveness smells like rain," he said once, "and famine wears shoes when it walks." Miriam and David listened until listening became a kind of fasting. Their conflict did not vanish. It turned into reverence that had not yet decided what to call itself. He built shelves for the pantry and measured their savings. She brewed tea and learned to weep without scaring anyone. Between them, the boy moved like a small lit procession. "And you reading this from the safe side of the page, how many times has the divine passed between your minutes without a name? When the holy brushed your shoulder, did you call it weather? When mercy tugged at your sleeve, did you call it luck? If revelation walked into your kitchen and sat at your table, would you feed it or fear it? When you finally recognized it, would you be ready to follow where it leads? A word travels softly in Nazareth Heights. It slips through laundry lines, hums between balconies, and sometimes lands in the hearts of those who still know how to listen. One such heart belonged to Father Gabriel, an old priest from the small stone church that overlooked the city. He had baptized generations, buried countless, and lived long enough to know that not all miracles shout. Some breathe. Miriam didn't intend to tell him. But one Sunday, while Eli traced shapes on the church floor with his shoe, she found herself whispering, "Father, there are things my son says, words that aren't in Scripture." Gabriel didn't flinch. He had heard the tremor in her voice before, the sound of a soul that stands too close to mystery. "And how do these words sound to you?" he asked. "Like prayer," she said, "but not ours." That evening, the priest came to their apartment. He entered quietly, blessing the doorway as if crossing into a chapel disguised as a home. The light of dusk poured through the curtains, painting the walls gold. Eli sat on the rug, building small towers of stones he had brought from the courtyard, each balanced carefully, as though remembering where they once stood. Gabriel knelt beside him. "May I sit with you?" The boy nodded without looking up. His hands moved slowly, reverently. The priest watched in silence. Only after a long while did he speak. "Do you know Joseph, the one from the stories your mother reads?" Eli stopped. A stone slipped from his hand and landed softly on the rug. "Yes," he said. "I remember the sound of his chains." Gabriel's breath caught. The answer came so simply, without performance, without hesitation. "And what else do you remember?" Eli looked up for the first time. His eyes were clear, impossibly calm. "He forgave them," he said, "long before the dream of the wheat, even before the hunger came." The priest's eyes closed. For a moment he didn't see a child. He saw the reflection of something ancient in fragile form. He felt the same trembling he had felt years ago in Jerusalem when he stood before the Wailing Wall at dawn and realized that silence was also prayer. When he spoke again, his voice was low. "Do you hear these things often?" Eli thought for a moment. "Not with my ears," he said. "They visit when I stop thinking, like remembering something I never forgot." Gabriel nodded slowly. He reached into his pocket and took out a small cross made of olive wood. "You may keep this," he said, "but don't pray to it. Just hold it when the wind changes." Eli smiled faintly. "It already has." That night, after the priest left, the air in the apartment felt strangely lighter, as if the act of listening had opened a window inside the unseen. Miriam stood by the doorway watching the sunset fade into the city's dust. "He didn't judge," she whispered. "He listened." David nodded. "Maybe he saw what we can't explain." But Father Gabriel did not sleep that night. In his small room above the church, he prayed long after midnight. His Bible lay open before him, but he did not read. He stared at the page where Joseph forgives his brothers and felt that same warmth he had sensed in Eli's voice. The old priests understood what few dare to admit. There are truths too delicate for ink, yet too holy to vanish. In the following days he returned often, never to question, only to sit. Sometimes he would bring figs or bread. Sometimes he would ask Eli to draw what he felt when he spoke of Egypt. The boy would close his eyes and trace circles of light, always beginning at the center. Once, Gabriel asked gently, "Do you know why you remember?" Eli hesitated. "Because forgiveness leaves a scent," he said finally. "It doesn't die with the story." The priest felt tears rise uninvited. He realized this was no possession, no illusion, no trick of childhood imagination. It was remembrance made flesh, the echo of divine mercy finding a vessel pure enough to hold it. Before leaving, Gabriel touched Eli's head and whispered, "Do not let men turn this into spectacle. The holiest things are those we guard in silence." The boy nodded. "Then the silence is safe with me." When the door closed, the lamp flickered once like a bow. "And you?" If a man of faith sat before such a child and heard eternity speaking in fragments, would you ask questions, or would you listen? Would you dare to look into those eyes and meet the reflection of a God who still remembers his own stories? Or would you lower your gaze, afraid of recognizing something you once knew before birth? It began with small seams in the ordinary fabric of the neighborhood. A grocer who had weighed light for 20 years found himself resetting his scale without knowing why. A teenage boy, famous for shouting at his mother from the balcony, came down the stairs and carried her bags to the market without a word. On the bus, a driver who usually cursed at traffic lifted his palm and blessed the morning under his breath. No trumpet announced these changes. They came like dew, quiet, undeniable, leaving everything shining as if from within. Word, soft as bread, traveled along the corridors. There is a boy on the third floor who listens to light. They did not speak of miracles. They spoke of air, of how the air around him felt clean, the way a chapel feels after incense has told the truth to the walls. One afternoon, an old woman named Salma asked to sit in Miriam's kitchen. Her hands shook as she held her tea. "My husband died with my forgiveness still locked in my mouth," she said. "I have not slept since." She turned to Eli. "Can the dead hear us?" Eli did not answer quickly. He watched the steam lift from her cup as if reading a script written on the air. "Love is not buried," he said at last, voice small, steady. "Speak now. He will recognize the scent." Salma closed her eyes and whispered a sentence so simple it hardly seemed worthy of a lifetime. "I was angry because I was afraid." When she opened her eyes, the shaking had gentled not with logic, but with release. She kissed the top of Eli's head as though kissing a doorway and left with shorter sorrow. Children found the apartment by accident and on purpose. They brought marbles and questions. Eli never put on a show. He shared his bread and listened as if listening were a craft. A boy who bullied others sat cross-legged in the hallway, cheeks wet, admitting he had stolen coins from his mother. "Return them," Eli said, "and return the years you took with your eyes." The boy nodded, understanding something he had never been taught, that the gaze can rob as surely as the hand. Neighbors who could not enter sent notes. A shopkeeper confessed on a torn receipt that she had lied about her supplier and ruined his business. "If I repay him, I will lose what I own," she wrote. Eli asked for a pencil and drew 2 scales, one heavy with money, one heavy with peace. He circled the second. "Choose the weight you wish to carry," he said. The next week, the shopkeeper changed her prices. Her profit thinned, but her face lightened in a way that did not belong to arithmetic. Father Gabriel began leaving the church door open longer. People wandered in at odd hours and sat without asking for words. The priest learned a new ministry, to place a chair and keep silence. Sometimes he brought a basket of figs to Miriam's door and, without entering, asked only, "Are you tired?" She would smile with eyes that had cried and say, "Yes" and "No." He understood. Heaven is heavy even when it is kind. The more the community softened, the more resistance sharpened at the edges. A man from 2 buildings over muttered that the family sought attention. Another said the boy was a ventriloquist for his parents' beliefs. Rumor wears certainty like armor. Still, when they passed Eli in the courtyard, even the skeptical lowered their voices as if not to wake something sleeping. One dusk, as swallows stitched the sky with quick wings, a teenager named Yusef arrived shaking. He had wrecked his friend's scooter, lied about it, and watched the friendship rot. "I don't want to be that person," he said, eyes burning with shame. "But if I tell the truth, I will lose him." "You already have," Eli answered gently. "Truth is the bridge back." He placed the olive wood cross, Father Gabriel's gift, in Yusef's palm. "Carry this only until the words cross your mouth." The next morning the boy returned the cross and the lie. The friendship, though bruised, stepped alive again. Stories like these never look like headlines. They look like decisions. Small, stubborn, luminous. They multiplied. A nurse who cut corners at the clinic replaced supplies from her own purse. A landlord forgave 1 month's rent and slept for the first time in weeks. A father with a loud temper showed up at his daughter's school play, holding flowers bought with hands that once broke things. When asked why, he said, "A little boy told me, 'Famine wears shoes when it walks. I will not invite it through my door.'" Miriam watched her home become a waiting room for mercy. She brewed tea until the kettle sounded like a bell. She kept the notebook open, not for sayings, but for names, so that none of them would be lost in the river of kindness passing through. David repaired cabinet doors and wobbly chairs for neighbors who came to talk and forgot why they'd come. The apartment learned to hold confession without echo. No one could ignore it any longer. A journalist left a card. A cousin of a local official asked for a meeting to ensure safety. Father Gabriel fielded calls with the sovereign patience of a man who would rather miss an appointment than miss God. He told everyone the same thing: "Come as you are. Leave your microphones at the threshold." Through it all, Eli remained a child. He scuffed his shoes, skinned his knee, forgot where he left a favorite marble. He laughed at a pigeon who strutted like a governor. Yet when someone's sorrow entered the room, he grew quiet, as if a bell very far away had rung his name. One evening the courtyard filled with a hush that didn't match the hour. A breeze, thread-thin, touched the faces of those gathered outside. The grocer, Salma, Yusef, the nurse, the landlord, the doubter with folded arms. Lights from the hillside blinked like patient stars. Eli stood beside the open window with Miriam's hand on his shoulder. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. A peace with its own weight moved among them, settling on foreheads, loosening jaws, widening chests. Confessions rose. Soft, uncoached. Not spectacle, but surrender. I kept the apology I owed. I fed my anger like a pet. I forgot how to bless my children. I was cruel because I was tired. No one instructed, no one excused. The night held them in a bowl. And you, has your heart ever recognized something before your mind could name it? Have you ever stood in a common place and felt the uncommon press into you like light through thin cloth? When mercy found you last, did you look away? Or did you let it remake your face? The courtyard emptied slowly. People walked home lighter, not because their lives were easy, but because their burdens had become shareable. In the window, Eli watched the last pair of neighbors disappear into the stairwell. He turned to Miriam. "Tomorrow," he said softly, "we must be ready to listen longer." Miriam kissed his hair. David locked the door like a man closing a tabernacle. The lamp bowed once, then held its flame steady. Outside, the city slept like a child who had finally remembered a song she used to know. The whispers had reached beyond Nazareth Heights. Some called him the remembering child, others the echo boy. But inside the small apartment, nothing felt grand. Only quieter, heavier, like air before rainfall. That night, Father Gabriel asked the family to gather for a vigil. "No speeches," he said. "Only prayer." Word spread, and by dusk the courtyard was filled. Neighbors brought candles in jars. Some came out of faith, others came out of fear. A few came simply because silence had become rare and they missed it. The wind was soft. Curtains trembled in the windows. Miriam dressed Eli in a plain white shirt. He looked at her and smiled. Not the smile of a child about to be admired, but of one who knows something is ending. "Mama," he said, "tonight feels like when Joseph opened the doors of the granaries. Everyone came hungry, but they left full." She touched his cheek, trying not to cry. "Full of what, my love?" He hesitated. "Light," he whispered. "Always light." Downstairs, Father Gabriel lit the first candle and began to pray. His voice carried through the narrow courtyard like a song with no melody, only sincerity. The people answered with silence, the holiest language they knew. Eli stepped forward. He wasn't pushed or called. He simply moved when the air seemed to ask for him. The crowd parted without meaning to. A boy of 5 standing among dozens of grown souls, and yet no one saw smallness. He stood barefoot on the cool concrete, eyes lifted to the open sky. The night was clear, the stars sharp and awake. He spoke softly, but every word reached. When Joseph forgave, the famine ended. Not because the world was full, but because hearts stopped being empty. No one breathed. The priest lowered his candle. The well was never a prison, Eli continued. It was the place where God hid mercy until the world was ready to remember. Tears ran silently. The grocer, the nurse, the boy who once lied, the woman who could not forgive, all of them felt something invisible rearranging their hearts. It was not emotion, it was remembrance. A wind moved through the courtyard, gentle, circular, alive. The flames of the candles bent but did not die. Eli's hair lifted slightly, his face calm. He cried, the boy said, not because they betrayed him, but because he saw how hard it is for love to stay when fear gets loud. Miriam fell to her knees, not in fear, but awe. Father Gabriel closed his eyes. This is what prophets sound like before the world names them, he whispered. Eli turned his gaze upward, toward a point beyond the visible sky. It's bright again, he said softly. The well is full of light. Then he fell silent. The courtyard held its breath. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once, then stopped. Time seemed to fold inward. For a moment, only a moment, every person there felt it. A warmth soft as forgiveness, expanding from the child like dawn from a hidden horizon. A silence that wasn't emptiness, but presence. A knowing that did not need words. When the wind settled, the light returned to its ordinary softness. Eli turned to his mother, tired but peaceful. It's done, he whispered. He remembers now. Who, my son? God, Eli said simply. He walked to her, leaned into her arms, and fell asleep before reaching the doorway. Miriam carried him inside. No one followed. They stayed outside, not because of reverence, but because they knew they had already entered something sacred without moving a step. Father Gabriel raised his candle once more. The flame burned straight. He spoke to the gathered souls, voice trembling with gratitude. Forgiveness, he said, has visited us. Feed it well. No one clapped. No one shouted. They just stood, hearts loosened, eyes wet, hands open. And you, if you had been there that night, when the child's voice lifted what words could not hold, would you have heard it? Would you have recognized that the divine does not descend from heaven, but rises quietly in the breath of those who forgive? Or would fear have spoken louder? The vigil ended, but the silence did not. It followed them home, kind and persistent, a memory that hummed long after the lamps went out. Morning returned without headlines. No banners, no declarations, only light, honest and plain, walking across the kitchen tiles. Eli woke late, hair rumpled, the soft fatigue that follows great weather in the soul. He asked for bread with honey. He laughed at the pigeon on the windowsill, the one that strutted like a tiny governor. Miriam watched him and felt the ache a mother feels after a miracle. Gratitude so deep it almost hurts. Nothing special happened. Dishes were washed, a shirt was mended. David checked the leaky tap and made a list for the hardware shop. Yet everything wore a new temperature. The apartment seemed to hum, not the noise of appliances, but the quiet music of a place that has learned how to keep a vow. Outside, Nazareth Heights moved along its familiar rails, and still, something had settled over the neighborhood, like dew refusing to hurry. People greeted one another with eyes less armored. A landlord waved to a tenant without calculating the wave's usefulness. A teenager returned a library book on time and felt oddly proud without boasting. These were not miracles the way the world names them. They were obediences, and obediences are seeds. Father Gabriel visited without knocking. He stood in the doorway as a man stands at a sanctuary threshold, then stepped in with a blessing that sounded like a sigh. Eli ran to him with ordinary delight. The priest touched the boy's head, and for once did not search the air. "You're still a child," he said softly, as if granting permission. "I am," Eli answered, and reached for the fig basket on the table. They spoke of small things on purpose. Loose tiles on the church steps, a neighbor's stubborn cough, the bakery that had changed hands again. Holiness, after all, must learn to breathe through dailiness, or it will not stay. Only when Miriam poured tea did Gabriel glance toward the window and say, "Last night, many hearts laid down their weapons." His eyes shone the way old stone shines after rain. "Do you think it will last?" David asked, not skeptically, but as a carpenter asks whether a joint will hold. "Forgiveness lasts," the priest said, "but people must choose it each morning like bread." In the days that followed, Eli's words fell back into childhood. Names of classmates, colors he preferred, a question about whether clouds sleep. Sometimes the old river rose. Once he whispered, "Grain has a memory for hands that measure honestly." And another time, "Hunger listens when kindness speaks first." Yet even these lines arrived lightly, like feathers that know where they're going. Miriam returned the notebook to a shelf and left it closed. Names had been written there, and names are sacred. She cleaned the apartment slowly, the way a sacristan cleans after a vigil. No haste, no chatter. She made space on the table for ordinary clutter again. Crayons, a loose button, a school form needing signatures. The lamp stood steady, untheatrical, happy to be a lamp. The community learned a modest liturgy. The grocer set his scale level each morning and touched it, as if it were an altar. Salma visited the cemetery with flowers, and a sentence finished at last. She wept the kind of tears that water what they fall on. Youssef looked his friend in the eye when he spoke, learned to let silence do some of the speaking. The nurse at the clinic labeled every vial with clean handwriting and called patients by their names. No trumpet, no spotlight, just faithful hours. Of course, not all was easy. Rumor persisted in corners. Someone online wrote that the boy was a trick. Someone else wrote that he was a saint. Both missed the point. Father Gabriel smiled tiredly at both versions and kept the church open. If you must name, he told them, name the mercy you practiced today. One evening, as the sun folded itself into copper, David and Eli climbed the stairs to the roof. The city spread below like a sleeping hymn, minarets and bell towers, satellite dishes and laundry lines, alleys where children still invented games that cost nothing. David sat with his legs dangling over the low wall and handed Eli a small wooden plane he had carved. The boy sent it sailing and clapped when it circled back like a patient bird. Does the well still shine? David asked, eyes on the sky. Eli thought, it shines when people forgive, he answered. Light likes those places. Father and son watched the first star appear. David's hand found the boy's small shoulder. He did not think of doctrines or definitions. He thought of the day he first held Eli. He thought of how love, when it is true, prefers to be simple. Downstairs, Miriam folded laundry while listening to the apartment's new quiet. Not an empty quiet, never that, but the quiet of a heart that has stopped arguing with grace. She placed the olive wood cross on the windowsill where light liked to pause and whispered, stay. She didn't mean the object. She meant the presence that knows how to hide inside plainness until we are ready again. In time, visitors came less often, not because they forgot, but because they remembered enough to carry the remembering home. The courtyard no longer swelled with vigil. It swelled with dinners, with mended friendships, with a child's laughter spilling down a stairwell and being forgiven by an old man who used to complain. Eli learned to tie his shoes. He scraped a knee and cried the ordinary cry. He brought Miriam a crushed flower and called it a garden. He slept deeply, woke hungry, and asked whether rivers ever get tired of moving. When the old music rose in him, it did not demand a room. It simply brushed the edge of a sentence and was content to rest there. And you, how many things does God whisper to the world each day while we are busy proving we can hear? How many doors open in kitchens and are missed because we are looking for fire on mountains? If a child's memory, borrowed from heaven, crossed your path and asked you nothing but to be kind, would you recognize the request? Nazareth Heights returned to its weather. So did the family. Only the floor under their feet felt steadier, as if an invisible beam had been placed beneath the house. Father Gabriel said, Mass, swept the sacristy, and smiled in the same breath. The lamp in the apartment bowed only to wind now. Bread rose, cooled, was shared. Names were spoken carefully. The story did not end. It learned to live without applause. When night came, the sky over the hill gathered its stars like a mother gathers children. Eli pressed his face to the window and watched them brightening one by one. He did not ask them to sing. He did not need proof. He simply placed his hand on the glass and let the cool find his skin. Somewhere in the rooms of God, a well was still full of light. The apartment slept. The city breathed. The silence kept its promise.